All right, folks, welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. I'm your host, AJ Armstrong. You can go to my website, aaronjarmstrong.com, to find out more about me. But today's guest was absolutely incredible. We talked mindset. And, one of the things about mindset, mindfulness, concentration, focus, these things that seem to be very common factors in successful people, the way Christian Straka, our guest today, was able to break that down for people and bridge this gap about, this kind of like intense in like militaristic level of discipline through to the level of this more like holistic, peaceful meditation, zenful experience, and how he actually showed why those are virtually one and the same through our conversation was absolutely remarkable. So a little bit about Christian Straka. Christian Straka has developed a unique approach to mindset training through methodologies for applying evidence-based mindfulness techniques in sports. Christian's been practicing mindfulness for many years. He's a unified mindfulness L squared coach, a member of the mindfulness facilitation program at UCLA's Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, and a member of International Mindfulness Teachers Association. As a coach for professional athletes, Christian has in-depth experience in professional tennis, as a player on the international circuit, as well as a coach on all professional levels. He was the head pro of the Hofsass Tennis Academy, training the German national team. He coached multiple top 10 players throughout their tennis careers and was a personal coach for Victoria Azarenka, the former number one, and Andrea Petkovic, former number 10 player. I apologize for butchering these names. You can tell I am not a tennis professional, but Christian Straka is absolutely one of the most intense coaches on various types of professional athletes, including the last several decades, where he's turned mindset training to peak performance through evidence-based mindfulness skill development, which he incorporates in his function of the global mindset coach for Adidas runners. So he's also a running coach, among dozens of other incredible experiences. He's the co-creator and CEO of MindSize. He's also the Adidas Runners Global Mindset Coach. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, you will surely enjoy our conversation today about how you bring intense focus, clarity, concentration, and mindfulness into your business practices today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you how to be somebody.
Where in your life did you learn that you're not good enough?
Take what you're most passionate about and what you're most fearful of, and what is the plan to overcome that fear, and what is the plan to enact that passion.
All right, everybody, welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. I am your host, AJ Armstrong. You can find me on Instagram at AaronArmstrong33, or you can go to my website, aaronjarmstrong.com. Joining me today from, actually, my wife and I are on the road, and we had to find a spot with a little bit of service here in the middle of Pennsylvania. But joining us, thankfully, is a man who's a mindset expert, works with professional athletes, works with people of all different calibers, especially those kind of peak performance individuals. And we're going to learn some of his methods and methodology for going through different mindset techniques and how you can set yourself up for success. This man is named Christian Straka, joining me today on the show. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It's my pleasure.
Christian, I want to thank you again for jumping on today. And I wanted to, as I was learning about you and learning about your background, just all of the really incredible lives you've lived within this one life. And I wanted to just kind of ask you, where did it all start for you? What led you into your kind of different success habit, company building, training that you do today?
That's an awesome question, actually. I would say it all started with my parents supporting me and allowing me to do what I love. I think that's where it came from. Even though my parents were quite academic and paid a lot of attention to grades and generally for themselves, and also my sisters who are a little bit older. I was from an early age, basically sports, tennis especially, was my passion.
Yep.
And they have supported me from day one, like no questions asked. It was kind of obvious that, I was not really that into just like learning and just going the academic route. And they did everything they could to kind of support me in, you know, th- what I wanted to do already as a little kid. And this thread pulled through my entire life until now, that I always prioritize doing what I love and have a passion for. And then everything kind of falls from that. With the passion, obviously comes a lot of intrinsic motivation. And when you're very motivated, then you just do whatever is necessary to become as good as you can at whatever you're doing.
That's an interesting idea. We talk on the show a lot about that kind of blend between things you're really good at, things that are valuable in the marketplace or in your industry or things like that, and then also what you're passionate about. And it sounds like, if you do things that you're really excited about, but you're not necessarily very good at them, that can also be a problem. And you've run into this starving artist example. You mentioned how passions really kick up that intrinsic motivation in people. Talk to me a little bit about, how you've noticed finding your passion or helping other people find their passions and how that's led to different type of success patterns.
Yeah, so passion for me is something where I get very excited about, for not necessarily a logical reason. It's really just a feeling that you have. There's just nothing else that you really want to be doing. And when it is not something that you just, a passion for, in some cases, might be a little bit short-lived. Some people like get really into something and then they kind of lose interest very quickly.
Yeah.
So but that, I wouldn't really describe that as a passion. A passion for me is something that you get into just like that, but then it doesn't leave you, you know.
Mm.
So when you find that, and if you're really lucky, you find that when you're very young, and then if you notice what implications that has, if you're really doing what you enjoy basically all the time, and in order to be able to become as good at your passion as you possibly can be, of course, it's also necessary to do things that you don't like doing so much. But the ratio is really very in your favor. There's
Yeah.
like 10, 20, 30% of the things that you're doing are maybe not very pleasant, but you're still motivated to do them because you know the benefits that you're going to reap from them once you do them in the future. But the vast majority of your time, you're spending um, your time doing things that you really enjoy in that moment of doing them. You're kind of automatically present. You're automatically mindful because you are not interested in doing anything else. You're just really fully immersed in your activity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's so much goodness just to dissect with that idea. I mean, think about, um, I don't know, like help me understand how you found what you were passionate about and how you help other people find that thing, because especially people maybe in their early 20s, or maybe they're just retiring or whatever, they try out a bunch of stuff, but they might not feel it the same way that maybe you or me do, or that someone that's been around a little bit longer in their passion for a while. Tell me what that was like for you.
So, for me, it was really, I started playing tennis, when I was very little, and
Sure.
I'm 4 years old. And if you are doing something that you really have a passion for, not all the time, but maybe more often than not, there's some a combination of natural talent, whether when you're an athlete, maybe some coordinational talent, physical talent. If you're more of an artist, there's more creativity, and so forth, but also paired with this interest of like, when you're doing it as good as you can, and then maybe even paired with some short, midterm, long-term goals that you have, that might not be goals that are relevant to other people, but to you personally, they are relevant. The issue I find for a lot of people who don't find that is that if they don't get as lucky as maybe some people who just try out one or two things and then they find their passion, um, they are not going out and looking for their passion.
Mm,
So if you are in the situation that you know most people are in, then you just gotta kind of go by trial and error. You just can't skip every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe finding something new, but like do something that really speaks to you when you see somebody else do it, when you hear about it, maybe you've tried it out, and now maybe spend a little bit more time on doing that, especially if you are younger. If you're not already, you have established your life and you have a job and this, then you can still do that, but it's a much bigger challenge because you have to restructure your whole life if you wanted to make a living out of that. But if you are in college, starting to go to college, you just come out of college, you have not established your life in a way that you would if you're in your 40s. You might not have kids and a wife yet. You could move around in the world. You can try out different professions. And that is where you have the real opportunity to experiment a little bit. And part of that is um, not shying away from failure. Failure is
mm,
a big part of success. There are very few people that I have ever heard of, that really became successful. And I don't mean commercially successful necessarily. It could be, just inner success. They're just really content and happy with what they're doing, even
sure.
though on the balance sheet, maybe, they don't have a lot of money. So finding that success or becoming successful in that way, generally speaking, requires a lot of failure until you get to that point. And if failure for you is part of the process, is like you understand that's just how you get there, then failure is not a problem anymore. It's just a stepping stone.
Yeah, that there's a lot of that's such an interesting dynamic that people go through is this like either fear of failure, but they don't understand really how it might feel to actually fail. And we can throw that out there. And it's I think that what I've noticed was like a good friend of mine, one of his brothers started a hedge fund when he was 25 years old. And, really ambitious thing. And he was getting, millions of dollars from billionaires to invest into this hedge fund, and the entire thing went under. And then he just kind of turned over and decided he was going to work in a different industry. I was kind of sharing with them. I was like, it sounds like the people that keep getting back in the game after they fail is the thing that really separates the successful people in many different respects from the unsuccessful people. It's not just being okay failing, but then being able to continue to try to perform at something along those same lines. Now, you work with a lot of, top level athletes, some of the most competitive people on the planet. What is it that what is it that you've noticed with some of the great competitors? Like what are like the common themes you've noticed they always bring to the table?
It's very much basically what we are talking about, just in a condensed time frame. So, as a professional athlete, you are failing all the time. Like, let's just say you're playing tennis. Even if you win a match, you are losing a lot of points in the match. And if you let each point that you lose kind of determine, your reactions, if you and then you don't have the ability to behave independently on how you react to these mistakes, then you're not going to be able to perform at your best.
Mm,
And the people at the very top, they are using the mistakes that they make, the points that they lose, the failures that they experience, they use it as information that they can take advantage of. So they lose a point in this way. Let's say they hit it too far to the right. Then they're not going into this loop of, oh, why did I hit it for too far to the right? Like, I'm playing so bad today. That's crazy. Like, I don't want that to happen again. And rather than they take the necessary um, data points out of that experience, like, I made contact a little bit too far behind me. Next time I need to make contact more in front of me. Or I'm making contact too far behind me because I'm too far inside of the court, so I need to step back. So that is kind of the shift that they're able to make every single time they, in quotes, fail. And then the failure doesn't repeat itself in the same way over and over. And that's why they're able to, optimize their performance so much.
That's really an interesting way of looking at it, and I never thought of it that way, where like I know nothing about tennis other than I enjoy watching it every once in a while when it's on TV. But you see the way that they play, and it's the great players, as you mentioned, lose points all the time, but it's about being able to synchronize that information, like which were the points that I lost, what are the things that I am doing wrong, and being able to kind of analyze that information and almost improvise in response to it consistently. And it's like that is such a great metaphor for how to look at things, even in a business aspect or even in a personal aspect with success stories. It's like, how do we take all these different micro failures and just these hundreds of thousands of decisions we make on the daily, on the regular, and continuously synchronize that information, improvise accordingly, but just continue to make a couple better decisions in proportion to the poor decisions, much like a tennis player or an athlete would do.
Yes, exactly. The fundamental principles really don't need to change because it's all about decision making, right? And taking advantage of the information, the sensory input that you're experiencing, whether that's visual or auditory, or or it's internal. You're having thoughts, visual thoughts, auditory thoughts. Somatic experiences. So for athletes, if you are in the business world, a lot of times the whole thing is more intellectual. So it's auditory experiences in terms of what are people saying, how are people reacting, what is the outcome of a certain decision that you have made, and then not going into that negative feedback loop as an entrepreneur when you have done when you've made a decision that is suboptimal and it didn't result in what you wanted, and now being able to take a step back, or maybe I should say take a step up in terms of what perspective you take, how far detached are you from this? Are you totally submerged in it and you're like struggling with the experience itself, or are you just able to look at it more like a scientist and say, oh, this is what I did, this is what I wanted to do, this is how the people reacted, this is what they didn't like, this is what they did like, what can I do now in the next step to benefit from this information? How can I improve the situation? How can I change the next step that I'm doing, where the information that I have right now that is based on that failure can benefit me? I will know now, okay, these things I should not do, these things I need to start doing, and these things I need to do differently. And then you will, whatever you're doing, you will optimize your decision making and your behavior over time. And the next time you make a decision, you might still fail, which is perfectly fine as long as you're not failing in the same way again. And then you will
Yeah,
learn again from it.
yeah, it's like you're almost just taking, thousands of different data points regularly to keep honing in your decision making capability. And just like any mathematical model or anything, the more data points you have, the more reliable your mathematical model would be, right? So it's kind of like that in this way, where it's like the people that are very conservative or maybe too conservative, and they don't make a ton of decisions, or they don't make any, they don't take a lot of chances, well, then they're also missing a lot of data points. So their decision making ability will also be less reliable over time, because they're not continuously getting themselves out there and getting out there and being okay failing, learning from it, and kind of jumping back to the next thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 100%. And you can, basically implementing a little bit of the mindfulness perspective here, that like athletes really benefit from if they're able to use these mindfulness skills in the moment, on top of if they're also developing them over a longer period of time. Really, one of the effects it has is that you are going through life, whether you are performing as an athlete or as an entrepreneur, um, in a more scientific way, like a mathematician or like whatever other scientist you might be, which means you are not you're trying to not be as biased towards your own opinions and towards the outcome. You try
Mm.
to take a more detached approach. Of course, you have preferences. There's things that you enjoy, things you don't enjoy, things that you like and you don't like, things that are pleasant and unpleasant. But they will not dictate your behavior and your decisions anymore. Your decisions will now be based on the data itself. And some decisions you will then make, even though it's an unpleasant act that you need to do, you will be able to do it because it's not such a big deal for you, and you know it has a positive outcome in the future. Or on the other hand, you will not do something that you really want to be doing, but if you think about it clearly, you realize, well, actually, that will not have a beneficial impact on me or on my business, even though I really feel like I need to do it right now.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, so just like, as we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier, working with just, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of athletes, however many it's been with you at this point, and at the top levels of professionalism, I know in tennis for sure, and probably other industries. Tell me, what is it like? What kind of personality characteristics do you notice are the same with the people that continuously outperform others? Like, what is it that you would say every person has this?
Yes, it's basically exactly what I just tried to describe. Every person that I have met that really, becomes or reaches their optimal level of performance. On the one side, if they really reach the absolute top peak in the world, then there is some degree of natural talent in whatever sports it is.
Right, right.
But much, much more importantly, because there's a lot of people that are very talented physically speaking, what the people at the very top have in common is that they are able to um, do things that are unpleasant right now in order to benefit in the future from doing those unpleasant activities.
Like the discipline, like the
So it's
conscientiousness,
basically
the
delayed gratification.
yes.
So a lot of people in the world walk through life by and their actions and their behavior is dictated by likes and dislikes. So if I like to do something, I'm going to try everything right now to be able to do that. And if I don't enjoy something, I'm going to try to not do it, try to suppress it, avoid it, get rid of it.
Hmm.
um, the people at the very top who are very successful, they don't look at life like that. They don't try to do the whole things, only things that are enjoyable, and they don't do any of the things that are not enjoyable. It's a very different approach to life. They do things whether they are enjoyable or not, but always with the thought in the back of their mind, well, this has a benefit for me in the future. It might be a short lived benefit. In the next hour, it's good for me, or it might be the next week that's good for me, or it might be more long term. But the vast majority of actions that they take throughout the day, not just so as an athlete, you have to live your whole life as long as you're an athlete in that way. Everything that you do the whole time is tailored towards you being able to perform better in the future. So when you are performing, that everything is basically as optimal as it could be. Whether it's how much water am I drinking? Well,
Mm.
there's very few people that want to be, drinking 2 gallons of water a day. It's not the most unpleasant thing, but it's not fun either. It's going to bed at a certain time. It's not drinking the alcohol that you want to drink. It's not eating a certain amount of chocolate. It is, doing another 10 reps on the exercise when you're feeling tired. It's adding in another 20 minutes of stretching, even though the training seems kind of over. So you're doing all of these things, and you really learn to have a more detached kind of relationship with pleasant and unpleasant activities, because they're really all tailored towards your bigger goal, which is always somewhat in the future, however far or near.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that is one of, and there's also like a lot of just socioeconomic or excuse me, sociological evidence that supports that. I don't know if a lot of people are listening follow a personality test. It's called the five personalities test, and it's been around for a long time, which is why there's tons of data on it. And I've talked about this before, but one of the skills is called conscientiousness that tends to be a predictor of successful people in industry or the workplace. And that conscientiousness test is basically the same thing that you're describing here. It's that delayed gratification, the ability to follow through with one thing until the end. Now, my question, Christian, is let's say someone, I think we agree that the top performers right there can usually have this delayed gratification ability. But let's say someone knows that I feel like I'm low on conscientiousness. I feel like I'm not as disciplined as I should be. Can people change that? And if so, how do they improve their ability to be able to sacrifice the immediate pain for the long-term pleasure?
Yes. So that's really the secret sauce in the end, right?
Right.
So a lot of people still today, and I was one of those people, when I was younger, kind of believed that however you tick, however you function, it's kind of that's it. You
Hmm.
can't really change. And I can speak just from my own experience is you can very much change. The question is, do you want to change? You definitely will have a hard time changing other people, but changing yourself is definitely a possibility. However, the way you change does not happen um, in the way that most people would hope for, meaning in an instant. It's not like, ooh, you have this new understanding, this new perspective of something, and all of the sudden, you're making all different decisions and you're not having an issue with unpleasant experiences, and like you're totally able to change your behavioral patterns and so forth. This is actually a process. And that is where the mental development or the development of the mental skills comes in over time. So if you understand um, why you want to develop those mental skills, where the benefits are for you personally, individually for you, as you live your life, and then you understand how to do that. That's the intellectual part. Then what you need to do is actually put in the time to develop those mental skills. And when you
Mm,
do that, there is absolutely no reason why you cannot change very, very much into the direction of where you want to be, right? So
yeah.
if you are in the situation that you just described, like you notice like you're not that conscientious, but you really want to be, then okay, you now understand, like if you're listening to what I'm saying, like put in the time, go on a website. There's different teachers, a lot of fantastic books, um, people that have gone through that exact same process, that same problem or issue that you were having, and they were able to change how they are behaving over time. And once you understand these methodologies and the systems in place that you can take advantage of that will have this effect on you, then in the end, it's going to just depend on how much time do you dedicate to developing these skills, and that will determine, how far you will get.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really interesting way of looking at it, which is first there's that why, that connecting into why am I doing this? Why do I want to change? And that should be personal to everybody because there's probably a different reason for everyone of why they want to change to be more conscientious or more disciplined or have more grit, more tenacity. There's probably some deeper reason. The second thing you said was how, right? Is how do we do that? Once you get the why down, now it's about figuring out how. Now there's programs out there, there's books, there's different techniques or hacks, but I'm curious, what are some of your hacks or skills or maybe exercises that people could try if they're trying to develop that ability to maybe have more intense focus, more intense mental clarity, more intense concentration on certain things, because I'm guilty of it all the time, is getting distracted in, and not so much the things I'm passionate about, but it's those intermittent things we talked about, when it's like, okay, now you got to do something you don't want to do, but this is necessary to get to the thing that feels good at the end. What are some of your go-to exercises people can take away for stuff like this?
Yeah, so this is really where I have dedicated my life to now, to teaching people exactly that. And it's important to understand that what I personally am teaching is not a quick fix, but therefore it is a deep fix.
Yep.
So once you embark on this journey and you understand why it's beneficial for you, and then you have to put in a certain amount of time to understand how to do these things, because as individual as the why is, the how is actually just as individual. At least in the way that I'm teaching. There's other teaching methodologies that have the how more streamlined. The how that I teach is also just as individual as the why. So, um, 10 different people might be doing 10 different techniques, because
Mm,
attentional skills are very situation specific. So, if we take just what you just said, for example, you really want to improve how you're able to really focus on something. Well, you might be able to focus on something in a certain situation, and then when you are in the similar situation but there's an additional activity happening, you all of a sudden can't do it anymore.
right.
That is actually something that you need to practice. Then you need to become as specific as that. It's
Mm,
again, it's like a scientist or like an athlete. Like, you can't just like try to overlappingly develop skills and then hope that they will somehow also work in these very specific situations. But if you let's just be very precise. Let's pick an example. You are trying to pay attention to what an individual is saying, and if there's absolutely no distractions, like you have a business meeting with an important investor, and it's important that you are really attentive, you're listening to what they're saying, and you're able to respond, to the best of your ability with all of the experience and knowledge that you have, with compassion and empathy. You know that there is possibly a real connection happening between you and that other person that you want to develop a working relationship with. And if everything is going well, there's no external distractions, the person is nice, and you don't have any distracting thoughts in your mind, there's nothing that happened in the morning at home, then you're able to do that. But now all of a sudden, you had the first conversation with that person, great, you're meeting the second time, and now when you're talking to them, actually, there is uh, an email that you got 10 minutes before you had the meeting, and it completely throws you off the track. And you're anxious now, and you're worried about what's going to happen, and you don't know what you're going to tell the person you're meeting now. So now you go into that meeting, and you might find yourself in a situation where, rather than really paying attention to what they're saying and being able to respond, you're actually being distracted the whole time by what's going through your mind. And you're
yeah.
feeling anxious now, and you're like not in a good place. And even though you might not be saying anything that might make the person on the other side of the table know what you're thinking about, they very much will notice that you are not as attentive anymore, right? So that is a situation that you might not want to find yourself in. So that is something as you can practice very precisely. And the way you practice that is in very different ways. So you could either come up with a situation that is quite challenging, where you intentionally trigger yourself in a way that you will be feeling similarly to what I was just describing. And then rather than paying attention to it, you try to pay attention to somebody else. So you can practice that with a friend or with your wife, let's say, right? In that
Yeah.
moment, because you know that's an important skill for me. If I want to develop my business, I need to have this ability to be really attuned and focused on the other person, completely independent of whether I just got bad news or not. So you need to learn, practice how to be cool with bad news. And you
Yeah.
attend the bad news when it's appropriate, but not in that meeting. Okay.
Yeah, it's really it's interesting what you're describing is almost, it sounds so intuitive after you've explained it, but like, for example, what you're kind of describing is creating drills or like, different like different practice drills like you would do in a sport where you're simulating certain situations. And by doing that over and over and over again, just like as an athlete would practice these different drills, simulate this situation, eventually it'll be very natural in the game. And you don't think to do that in life all the time. It seems like it's like only something you would do in athletics, but the same logic would apply. Just like this, like if you wanted to put a like you in the example we just had, if you're trying to really focus on a conversation with people, it's really easy to do when there's no distractions. So you almost like maybe put a not recommending you do this, but you put like a dog shock collar on you, and zap you while you're trying to pay attention to somebody. And eventually, when you're getting distracted at a cocktail party by something else, it's just much less distracting than the dog collar. Obviously, I don't recommend that, but you get the idea. It's about clever, like creatively kind of creating these different drills and circumstances that are applicable in specific business or social contexts.
Yes, exactly. And there is a flip side to that also, which is these situations, the unpleasant, challenging situations of, just as one example, being distracted in different ways. Um, you can create just the way we explained, but you can also take advantage of the opportunities when you are being distracted. So, all of us every day or most of the days will be experiencing at some point during the day, uh, um, a couple of minutes or a couple of hours of time where we don't feel so good. And now we have a more challenging time to pay attention to what we really need to pay attention to our job, to whatever it is that we are doing. And when we can reframe our perspective to actually look at these situations not as problems, that oh shit, now it's difficult again, but actually look at that situation as an opportunity where, oh, now there's a challenging situation, I don't feel so good, or I'm being distracted by this, and now I can try to practice paying attention to something different, what somebody's saying, or reading a book, or watching a video, whatever it is that you need to be doing. Then you are implementing these practices into your life in a very natural way. You don't even have to put time away for it because it's just happening to you anyway already.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of at when I was at West Point, we had to go through like some advanced survival swimming classes. And at West Point, when you were a junior in college, they called you a cow. That's just like some stupid nickname. So in the name of the class, they called it cow drowning, and this was called survival swimming. Well, one of the things that they did is they taught you how to kind of like use your clothes to float, and like how to tread water for long periods of time and all this kind of stuff, right? But then when they would test us on this one certification, there was a pool room, and it was a wave pool, and it had giant speakers everywhere, and then had strobe lights, and it would simulate like a helicopter had crashed in a storm, and all of this noise was going on, and the waves were in your face, and it was dark, and it was like strobe light. I mean, it was just as many different stimulus sensational distractions you could find. And what that taught you to do, though, is like you were saying, like over what you would do leading up to the test is you would you know focus on just taking your boots off in the water, getting your pants to become flotation devices, and how you could tune out all these different distractions and focus on the main thing. And that's the same kind of drills I think you're explaining too, is like it's like maybe not to that extreme, maybe you don't need a wave pool, but being able to find out how you can position yourself in these different circumstances, because that example I think is very relevant today now when things are very intense or very distraction. I always reflect on that and just kind of like, okay, it's all just about tuning out these different things and being able to focus on the thing that needs to happen here.
I mean, yes, that's what you're describing. What you went through in West Point is exactly that. Now, also, like you were saying, like that's not what a young entrepreneur or whatever situation you find yourself in needs to actually practice. Um, but if you understand the fundamental principle of what this exercise teaches you, which is executive attention. So, executive attention is your ability to pay attention to whatever you choose, even though there is a distraction going on.
Hmm.
But you can work smarter. You can learn to deal with distractions that are actually realistic in the situations that you find yourself in. So, if you're in the military, the distractions that you're going to be experiencing are very different than if you're on Wall Street. And if you're on Wall Street, it's very different than if you're in politics, and that's very
Right.
different than if you're an athlete. So you want to become that specific and not just too broad, because it's not necessarily going to benefit you then as much as you would think.
Right. Yeah, and that's just gosh, that's just one example I know of many of the different things that you teach. One last one, kind of on the idea of, we have kind of focus, the way of focusing maybe amid chaos and distractions or things like that, of intense focus. But tell me a little bit about like mental endurance, right? So like that's another, is that the same kind of concept? Would you come up with like drills of how maybe I can focus for 5 minutes and then practice focusing for an hour? Like, what is the way that you would build up that ability to have like prolonged attention and prolonged discipline, things like that? Because I see these successful figures, and some of them are just like have unbelievable levels of discipline. They can stand for very long periods of time with a smile on their face and shake everybody's hand. Or athletes can just, they get up every time and they finish the drill, they finish the conditioning, they can run for long distances. I mean, it seems like this ability to just have this endurance, and it always seems to come down to, yeah, your physical endurance when you're in an athlete setting, but even still, having that mental ability to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Like some of my buddies who graduated from ranger school or have gone in different levels in the military, it just seems like those are the people that stand out to me. Tell me a little bit about how you can come up with like exercises or hacks for endurance.
Well, I mean, the exercises you're asking for are very the general idea is that they would be very helpful for people. What they need to kind of understand, I think, is if you're taking a mindful approach, right, which is definitely somewhat different than a lot of other people are doing, but not better or worse, of course, is that you're developing a set of skills. So the set of skills that you're developing when you're being mindful and you want to optimize your performance, so to speak, by using these skills, is on the one side that you are developing your ability to pay attention to whatever you want for however short or long. So that would be under the family of concentration. And there's many subcategories, which I will go into a moment. And one of those subcategories is sustained attention, or what you described as, more endurance in terms of how long you can pay attention to something. Then the second skill is clarity or awareness. So your ability to be able to track what you are experiencing and paying attention to in real time. So you notice more details. You don't think about what you're
Mm,
hearing, but you're just listening. You don't just see something, but you actually really watch. Or you don't just, for a brief moment notice that you have pain or you feel happy, but you actually really, really experience the location, the size, the intensity of that sensation. And then the third skill is coolness or acceptance, equanimity, openness, however you want to describe that, which is, what a lot of people in the military and a lot of athletes have developed more than people that are not exposed to unpleasant experiences as much, which is your ability to try to allow pleasant and unpleasant experiences to be there without trying to suppress them, without trying to cling to them, and instead taking a matter of fact approach, just allowing them to be there as they are, and therefore giving themselves the ability to act independently of those.
Mm,
So when you develop exercises, where you want to develop a certain subcategory of concentration. So the subcategories would be, on the one side, selective attention, which is your ability to choose what to pay attention to, or executive attention, just like we said, paying attention to something you want, even though you're being distracted, externally or internally. Um, Sustained attention, what we said, like mental endurance, and also um, momentary attention. So being able to pay attention to something for a very brief amount of time, 1 or 2 seconds, but just as much as if you would pay attention to it for 2 minutes and then move your attention to the next thing. So if you combine many of those attentional skills, you combine. So it's selective momentary attention, right? So you choose what to pay attention to, you select it, and then it's just momentary. So depending on the profession that you're in, depending on the life that you live, some of those skills are more relevant to what you want to be doing than others. So if sustained attention is relevant to what you want to be doing and is important, then there are certain exercises that you want to be doing. And sometimes it really sounds a little bit simple. It's just people that are not actually repeating this practice. So if you want to pay attention to something for a long period of time, um, people might actually try to practice that. They try to pay attention to something. Let's just say you are really listening to something. So you can go as simple as you're just standing on the street and you're listening to the cars driving by. And then you will get distracted after 2 seconds, 10 seconds, whenever. And then over and over, each time you get distracted, that is not an issue, that's not a problem, but it's an opportunity for you to now return your attention back to that same experience, to that particular sound that you want to
mm,
pay attention to. So, and then once you repeat that over and over and over, and I mean thousands and thousands of times, you will be able to extend that period of listening until you get distracted. So it will be 2 seconds, and then after months, it will be 5 seconds, and then after years, it will be a minute or two. There is people that can pay attention to the feeling on the tip of their nose for 4 hours without 1 second of mind wandering or getting distracted by anything. Like, this is how far you can develop your mind. But that is not something that they just chose to be able to do. It took them, decades of practice until they were able to do that.
wow. Yeah, that, I mean, I can think of so many different examples of how that'd be relevant and helpful in so many ways to be able to have that level of focus and prolonged concentration. One thing too is like as you were breaking it down with the example of the cars going by, it's not necessarily the getting upset with the distraction itself, but almost just kind of responding to the distraction without having to take so long to get back into your concentration, for example. Like, so one thing is, like, if I'm focusing on something and I'm interrupted, it can take me a long time to figure out where my train of thought just was to get back into it, which is why it becomes very frustrating to get distracted. But I imagine after a lot of practicing accepting or welcoming those distractions and getting back into your train of thought, you can kind of pick up where you left off much quicker. And over time, that will almost become more continuous than discrete in a way. And I think that's really an interesting way of looking at it and breaking it down.
Yes, I mean, you really nailed it in regards to that particular example. That's one of the skills that improves over time. So it's not just that you will not be distracted for as long anymore, but it's also that once you notice that you were distracted, how quickly can you return your attention to what you want to pay attention to? Right.
Hmm.
In that example, the sound of the car, or it could be, the thought in your mind. Maybe you're thinking about something, so return your attention to that. Or it's the sound of the voice of your business partner, or whatever it might be. So the sustained attention still has multiple elements. It has this element of how long can you pay attention to what you want to pay attention to. Then the next element is, well, if you get distracted, how long until you notice that you got distracted?
Mm.
And then once you notice that you got distracted, how long until you're able to return your attention, to back to what you want to pay attention to? Or are you now caught up in the negative feedback loop where you're like reacting to being upset about being distracted in the first place?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's this, I imagine just how much, like you think about how much the distractions you go through in life when you're trying to focus on things that are important, that how much that compounds over time and how much time is wasted in, just trying to find optimal levels of productivity in various different avenues or industries. And if you can remove those types of distractions to some level or get so much more efficient with where your focus is, you can just be such a more, productive performer in whatever you're looking to do. And you can just see how that works. Like, so the successful people, the focused people, the disciplined people, you can see how that manifests itself because someone like me who's just not that focused all the time, and I work on it. It's something I really try to get better at, but how much more waste there is with someone like me versus somebody that's constantly learning how to get back into it, noticing their distraction, returning to what it is, and they don't spend all that time traveling down the little rabbit trail of their little fairy thought that decided to come take them away.
Yes, exactly. And you actually brought up a crucial point, which is you were mentioning that like people are really spending a lot of time practicing these skills in order to improve them. And the only way that you can really dedicate a significant amount of time to developing these skills is not by um, doing it separately from your life. So, like dedicating 20 minutes, when everything is calm, and then you sit in a lotus position with your eyes closed, and then you have sound bombing going on. I mean, not that that is wrong or not helpful, but the issue is like how often during the day is it realistic for you to actually do that? And then even if you find the option to do that for 20 minutes a day, which would be pretty long, then it's only 20 minutes out of 24 hours. But you're awake for much more than 20 minutes. So you can start to, if you understand what the methodology is like, how these techniques work, and what the strategies behind them are. Um, that's really what I want to give to people is learn how to practice these skills in their life, not separately from their life. So you do it when you cook, you do it when you're working out, when you're running, when you're stretching, when you're walking your dog, when you're sitting in the business meeting, when you're talking to your friend. There is an there is almost, and almost, I really mean almost, no situation where you cannot practice these skills. But in order to get to that point, you need to understand the system. You need to understand, how you can direct your attention to your benefit, so it's appropriate and not actually making your life more difficult.
Yeah. And what I love about our conversation today, I didn't even plan to do this, but but when I think of mindfulness, or when a lot of people hear mindfulness, because I don't really think of it this way, but you'll hear this kind of person sitting pretzel legged on the beach, looking at a sunset with their eyes closed, just like in doing this deep breathing. But what this conversation kind of did today is it bridged the gap between this like more rigid masculine discipline intenseness that a lot of people get in industry, and then there's this other approach where people are a little bit more They're kind of more like flowy, and they kind of allow things to happen or whatever. And this conversation is like, no, they're kind of one and the same. Like having an intense focus is done the same way as using these mindfulness techniques, and we've almost bridged that connection a lot with this conversation. So I hope people listening to it felt the same way, because that's how I felt after kind of like just discussing this a little bit more with you. And I just have so many more questions I'd like to dig into, but it's we only have just an hour here today because I got to get back on the road. But Christian, can you just share with me a little bit about how people can get some more of this? Because I know you offer a couple different programs, and I know that you're also available on social media. Where can people find you, get connected to you, participate in some of these programs? Because I know you work a lot with athletes, but this is probably relevant to lots of different industries.
Yes, of course. You can go on my website, which is mindscizesports.com. That's where you will, get all the information that you really need in order to understand, like, why is it beneficial? What are you going to learn? What are you going to practice? How long is it going to take? It's basically an 8-week course that you do. It's self-paced at home, online, with a lot of support from other people. We have a Facebook group with a lot of people that are there to answer any questions. And then I am also on Instagram. You can look me up on straka.la. There posted a couple of tips and tricks here and there. I also work for Adidas as their mindset coach. So you will find a lot of kind of content when it comes to that. But really, on my website, where we have developed these different programs for athletes that, however, they really are focused, for example, for athletes, but not athletes that are competitive, but just basically, for me, an athlete is anybody that does any sport. So if you do 10 minutes of yoga once a week, then you're an athlete, and you can learn to incorporate these 3 skills: concentration, clarity, and coolness, in a way that it helps you. And when you learn to incorporate it into your activity, whatever that is, whether it's yoga, or you do a little weightlifting, or you like to play a sport like tennis or badminton, soccer, basketball, then you will also be able to incorporate into anything else, because it's quite complex to learn to incorporate it into a sport. So once you've figured that out, you can basically incorporate it into anything.
I agree. And being an athlete, when I was in college playing football, like, you get some of this stuff and you can see how it translates into life. But having the opportunity for people to be able to do this right now and translate it into life is just, especially a more concentrated, focused type of program, where it's all mindset stuff. I could just see how this would be beneficial in many different ways, just physically, mentally, in that same way that why people sometimes hire former athletes over other people is because of a lot of the benefits we're discussing right now. It's because it's much more marketable to have people that can work with teams, or be focused, or understand their body, their mind, like, think about an athlete has to be able to comprehend so many different things at once, but focus on a very specific task. And having that wit and those connections that go on in the brain to make that happen is something that, like, you could just take with you everywhere in life. And this is an opportunity here to be able to find that and to find the leading industry expert in this position. So Christian, thank you so much for sharing some of that with us today. It was really a pleasure getting to hear your perspective, as well as the laundry list of accomplishments that I'll make sure we drop in the introduction. But this was just an absolute pleasure to have you on today.
Likewise, Aaron. It was a lot of fun, actually. I hope we can do this again sometime.
I'd love to. I'd love to dig in for a long time on this. Maybe we can have you on as do a round 2 of this eventually, because this was so much fun, and I have so many follow-ups, and I think people are going to take away a lot of tactics that they can apply as well.
Fantastic.
Well, let's stay connected. Thank you so much, Christian. Once again, guys, you are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. You can find this podcasts at aaronjarmstrong.com/podcasts. You can go to Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, iHeartRadio, everywhere you want to listen to podcasts. And please leave a 5-star review and a comment of what you enjoyed about today's episode, and share it with a friend, a family member, or someone that you think would benefit from hearing today's discussion. And once again, guys, go out there, be somebody.